Welcome to Minutes by Board Cycle, where in each episode we pack the insights from one of Australia's boardroom leaders into just a few minutes. In this episode, host Richard Conway is joined by Carol Schwartz, Chair of Equity Trustees and member of the Reserve Bank of Australia, to discuss the important relationships between a chair, a CEO, and a company secretary.
Hello and welcome to Minutes by Board Cycle. I'm your host, Richard Conway, and today I'm joined by Carol Schwartz. Carol, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here with you, Richard.
So Carol's one of Australia's leading directors and is currently the Chair of Equity Trustees and a member of the Board of the Reserve Bank of Australia. She's also an agitator on a number of social issues, including climate change, gender equality and women's leadership, as reflected by her roles as the chair of Climate Council and Women's Leadership Institute Australia. Today, Carol's allowing me to pick her brain about a governance topic, being the intertwined roles of the chair, the CEO, and the company secretary of an organisation. So, Carol, a director that we previously had on this podcast said that the chair-CEO relationship affects shareholder value in an organisation. So I wanted to ask, do you agree with that? And what, in your view, are the secrets to a successful chair-CEO relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have a good working relationship with your CEO, then you should probably not be the chair. For me, when I'm chairman of an organisation, I see my role as being the partner to the CEO. I'm the sounding board, I'm partner, I'm a link to other board members, and I'm there to facilitate anything that I can for the CEO to be as successful as she possibly can be. And that is my role.
And do you have any tricks or particular approaches that you take to foster that relationship, or particularly to deal with stressful times, whether it's stressful in terms of your relationship or stressful in terms of an event that's happening to the organisation?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in all those sorts of situations, I guess. I think it's really important to be very open, very truthful, and also have channels of communication constantly open. So I will speak to CEOs at least once a week, if not more, if we are having challenging times for one reason or another. It's usually more than once a week. It can be daily, depending upon the challenges that we're facing. But I think that's really important. And when I say partner, sounding board, in those roles, it's really important to be honest. So if you think that the CEO is stuffing up for one reason or another, you have to be honest about that. If you think that they're taking the wrong direction with something, you have to be honest about that. The only way you can create that relationship of honesty is by constancy and consistency of communication. I mean, I've heard of situations where chairmen don't speak to their CEOs in between board meetings. I can't imagine what that must be like, not being on top of the challenges that CEO is dealing with, not being there to support them through those challenges, not being there as a sounding board. I mean, that just does not work for me at all. For me, it needs to be a really honest, open, well-communicating partnership.
And what are you, obviously from the CEO side, you're expecting them to reciprocate that honesty and openness, but are there other things that you really expect or hope for a CEO to do or to drive in that relationship to make it successful?
Well, I mean, as you just said, they have to be open. I guess they have to see me incredibly approachable. I've seen situations where chairman can be quite remote, quite conservative. That would not suit me at all. I've also seen situations where CEOs are resistant to the communication, to having that call once a week as a minimum. That doesn't suit me either. No, there has to be a relationship. And I think if it's not working, it will impact the business. It will definitely impact the executive team. It'll definitely impact shareholder wealth. And for me as a chairman, if I was in a situation where I had a CEO that I couldn't get on with, I could not remain chairman. of that organisation.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess to sort of summarize that, there needs to be an absolutely mutual kind of commitment to that relationship and see eye to eye in it, effectively in the importance and the value of making that relationship work for it to be successful.
Absolutely, beautifully expressed.
And I guess another thing I wanted to ask you about, which I think can happen both on the chair side and the CEO side, is that the chair can perhaps be in a situation where some directors on the board are not satisfied with the CEO or management's approach to things. On the flip side, the CEO can sometimes be in a world where the management team are not satisfied with the way that the board are approaching things. And how do you think about navigating those kind of issues, whether they're real or perceived?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I've probably been involved in both those types of situations. I'm not a particularly formal chair, so I'm very happy for my directors to have a direct link to the CEO or the executive leadership team. I think that's really crucial because each director needs to be able to form their own relationship with the CEO and executive team. I think that's important because each one of them actually plays a different role on the board. So, for example, you might have somebody who's the chair of the audit committee who needs to have that relationship with the CEO and the CFO. You'll have somebody who's the chair of the HR and REM committee. They need to be able to have that direct link with the CEO, with the head of HR. You have somebody who's the chair of the risk committee. Same thing. And then we've had in organisations that I'm involved with, which has worked really well, you have a director who's actually appointed as leading strategy discussions. We don't have a strategy committee, but you have a director who leads the strategy discussions. Well, obviously, they're going to need to have that relationship with the CEO and the executive leadership team. I mean, I don't know whether I'm really lucky because I have great people sitting around me on the boards that I'm on. And, they're very high-performing boards. But, that really works for me. And it seems to really work for my fellow directors and the boards that I'm on. Now, that's not to say that that's going to work for everybody, that it's going to suit everybody's style. But then I think, when one becomes a chairman, you have to work out what is your style, what works for you, and you craft the board to make sure that it's as high-functioning as possible and that everybody has bought into the style of leadership that you bring as chair.
And Carol, I wanted to introduce the company secretary into this conversation or this dynamic. And the reason for that is because I guess like the chair and the CEO, they are an interface between the board and management. I wanted to ask you to start off with, as a chair, what are the key things that you're looking for your sec to do in that interface role?
I need somebody really well organised who never forgets anything, because the CoSec takes all the minutes at the meetings. They're responsible to produce the minutes. Minutes are absolutely crucial. I mean, the fact is you don't want to be reading 150 pages of minutes, but you want to have minutes that truly represent the meeting as it was. And I think that's a hugely crucial role for a company secretary. I also think that keeping us on track with our compliance requirements within a board meeting structure is really, really important. And also liaising with the chair and other directors. I've been lucky enough, again, to have been exposed to great company secretaries, but I've also been exposed to some not so good company secretaries, and the distinction is stark. I think that a good company secretary keeps all meeting all regulatory requirements absolutely on track, and particularly in the listed board context, that is absolutely crucial. You don't want to be making mistakes.
And Carol, thinking about those company secretaries who perhaps haven't met your expectations, can you outline what you think the things were that they weren't doing that you really distinguished them from the good company secretaries?
Sloppy. not having a good memory as to, what was said, what wasn't said, bad minutes, not organising the meetings in the way they need to be organised. And I think that's really bad for a CEO as well. A CEO has to really be able to depend on the company secretary for that part of the business, the structure, the organisation, and the focus that needs to be on the area of meetings, of regulatory requirements, and of minute-taking. I think it's absolutely crucial.
And so, Carol, the company secretary's board-facing role is usually pretty clear, but surprisingly, I think their role in management and what their relationship with the CEO is sometimes a little bit less clear. And so I wanted to ask you to talk from that perspective. How do you think a company secretary should be approaching their relationship with the CEO in particular and management more broad?
Yeah, it needs to be a very close one for the reasons that I've just said. You're not going to have effective meetings and a well-organised meeting structure unless and also good agendas for the meetings, unless the CEO has that good relationship with the company secretary. It is an absolutely crucial role. In a way, the CoSec and the CFO are almost like the two ICs together with the CEO, and CEO must be heavily reliant on them, could be heavily reliant on them, and must have the right people in place so that they can rely on them.
And Carol, so to develop that reliance, I guess both with the chair and the CEO, a company secretary needs to develop a really trusted relationship with both of those people. And so how do you think a company secretary should navigate situations where those two roles are not seeing eye to eye, for example, or, again, more broadly, where there's tension between the board and management? And so do you think the company secretary has a role or responsibility to sort of proactively smooth those tensions?
I've never thought about that. Behind the scenes, they might smooth those tensions. I don't know, to be absolutely honest. I've never seen that play out. I don't know. What's your experience been?
I would say that I think sometimes the company secretary, needs to take conversations with both the management side and the board side in confidence. That's important to creating trust in those scenarios. But like all people in senior roles, you have to see potential train smashes well and truly before they happen and try and do what you can to head those things off. So I would say I think that there's a role for the company secretary in trying to, if they can see, for example, potential miscommunication happening, that's an obvious place where I think a company secretary should play a proactive role. If it's more personality based or something like that, I think it's much more difficult for a company secretary to play a role in that scenario. And ultimately, when you're thinking about a chair, CEO, company secretary dynamic, there's a clear primary relationship there and secondary relationships. So it's obviously very important not to overstep into that primary relationship and let the chair and CEO, for example, resolve things the way that they think is best in the end.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on. And also I do think there is an element of personality in that and in the relationships. As I said, I've never had a situation where that's been an issue. I have been exposed to some really fabulous CoSecs who play really, really good roles and who do see themselves also in a different sort of way as a sounding board for the CEO vis-a-vis things that might be going on within the organisation that don't escalate up to the relationship between CEO and chair. And I think it's probably a very trusted role.
Perhaps you've never seen it because you've had excellent company secretaries who are doing it without you ever even knowing it's happening.
That's probably absolutely right.
And one last question, Carol. If there was one thing that you wished company secretaries would do, but you think they rarely or never do, what would that be?
I've never actually worked in a company where we need separate legal counsel. And very often CoSecs have legal training
Yes.
is interesting. Very often they're not practicing lawyers, but they do have legal training. And I think that probably that combination of legal and CoSec is a really great combination. Maybe CoSecs should be encouraged more to get involved in giving legal advice. When you think about the role of the CoSec, I mean, it does sort of dovetail into legal counsel as well. And perhaps some of the CoSecs just need a little bit more encouragement to take on more of a role of legal counsel as well.